So this session is really going to be kind of cross spectrum, so across product lines. I know that this conference is very much focused on Business Central and a lot of the ERP components, but really think about this session as being a cross platform. So any place where you're building integrations, whether it's for customer engagement, Power Platform, data warehousing, or really any product at all, this session will hopefully challenge you a bit to think differently about the way that you do data integrations. And so what I would like to talk to you about is deleting your integrations. So when should we use integration and when should we not use it? And what are the various patterns for how we determine when we want to move data and when we shouldn't move data? Because there's a lot of other alternatives, which we'll chat about a bit today. So I know the session is called Delete Your Integrations, but hold on, don't click that delete button just yet. There's always some planning that needs to be done when it comes to data integrations. Sometimes you just simply can't get away from moving that data between systems because it's necessary to facilitate some sort of a business process, or it's just required for whatever specific problem that you're trying to solve in the company. So the key thing to think about here is, do I actually have a business process that requires an integration? Because there are other alternatives that you can do to help integrate data across systems other than simply building an integration. There's reporting opportunities, there's customization opportunities, there's virtual entities, there's lots of different ways that you can think about facilitating the requirement rather than just building an integration. So what I want to challenge you in this session today is really think through, do I need data integration before you go and build one? There's so much that you can do now with Power Automate and doing a lot of flows that can potentially integrate information where you may not necessarily need to build a full data integration like you have done in the past. So really think about that, and I want to challenge you to make sure that your business requirement is the thing that's really driving whether or not you need an integration. But anytime a customer, being whether you're a partner or an end user, your end customers are your business users. And so I really think that the way that customers think about integrations is more like a utility. A lot of times they think that there's a switch and you flip that switch and the integration just turns on. Software that's supposed to fix your business, it's supposed to make you more efficient, it's supposed to eliminate double entry. All of that happens whenever we just flip that switch. And we all know that that really isn't the case. The reality is a very simple data integration, such as quote to order, right? You may want to enter a quote in a CRM system and have that go into an order in ERP. That very simple integration can require things like customers and products, maybe kits and bill of materials, price levels, price lists, units of measure, unit groups, shipping methods, discount groups. All of that stuff could potentially be required in order to just transfer a quote. So it's never just as simple as the client thinks it is or as the end user thinks it is. And so really making sure that we combat that simplicity with really helping the customer understand what that complexity is really, really important. So how does an integration actually work? Well, you see this flow chart right here. This is just kind of a funny illustration of how data integrations actually work. I mean, what we're talking about is complicated. The things we do is complicated. It's not only the systems that get complicated, but man, sometimes the customer has years of processes that need to be unraveled and rebuilt. They may have different data models. They may have decisions that they have to make on which direction the data needs to flow. Is it going to be real time? Is it going to be a single direction? Is it going to be multiple directions? What are all the fields that need to be mapped? How the data needs to be converted and changed? What are the different pick lists that need to map across the different systems? You may have data in one environment that doesn't exist in another. All of those things require us to really think through what the actual system is. And really all of that has to happen before you even talk about the technology for how you're actually going to move the data. And so it's no wonder, because of all this complexity, why they always go over budget, because it's not easy. And I know all of us have probably experienced that data migration or data integration project that has gone over budget. And the biggest reason there is because they're complicated. We really have to combat that complexity and try to simplify things in order to make sure that that happens for our clients. So how do we simplify that process? Obviously, they're complicated. A data integration can be very complex. So how do we simplify it? So let's think about 6 steps to how we simplify a data migration or a data integration process. Number 1, I like to really call this being honest about the complexity. And this is something that we try to do with all of our clients, but I would encourage you to do the same thing with the business users that you're working with. So be honest about the complexity. Talk about it with them. It's really important that we don't just, we pull them out of that utility mindset and really bring them into the details. We need to bring them into the complexity to help them do field mappings, to help them really define what it is that they want that to do. We can't undersimplify and under budget an integration or even a data migration. That is important. And that's really where the budget part of this comes from as well, because a lot of times as a part of a pre-sales process or when you're scoping things or planning it out in a sprint, it's awful easy to really kind of underestimate that complexity, and you'll end up going over budget and have systems that don't work or don't work correctly because you ran out of budget or ran out of time in order to get it done. So really try to be honest with the clients about that. Number 2, there is no such thing as out of the box. I mean, I don't know how many times I've heard customers say, well, we just want the integration like it is out of the box. You know, we just want customer engagement and Business Central to just work the way it does out of the box. And the truth is that that's kind of a cop-out. You know, the customer just wants to try to not get into the weeds with you whenever they say we want out of the box. Out of the box very rarely works. I mean, a lot of times you're just trying to not take the time to design if the client says, I want it out of the box. Very, very few times have we seen where a data integration will work and to really facilitate all of those business requirements with just the out of the box integration. So take the time to design. Take the time to really think through which direction all the data is going to go, what are all the field mappings. Don't let the out of the box comment throw you for a loop. We want to make sure that we're really thinking about this as a real solution and not just flipping a switch and turning on an out of the box integration. So number 3, start simple and grow complexity. So this is something that we do a lot of times with our data migration and data integrations projects. Step 1, just get some data moving. Don't try to necessarily build the entire end-to-end integration or all of the different fields that you need to map and every transformation that you need to do. You know, start with the customer name. Start with the order ID. You know, start with something very, very simple and get that to work first. And then whenever you start adding in the other fields and the other logic that would be required for the integration, it'll make things flow a lot easier. And it really helps as a part of a sprint planning process or as a project plan process that you've seen it work. And the client or the end users have actually seen the data flowing back and forth. Sometimes that really builds confidence that this project's going to go well whenever you try to start simple and then grow in complexity. So there's so many times too that we've seen a lot of integrations, either where we come in to help a rescue project or maybe we're coming in to talk to a customer and there's a system that's just been way over architected. And then so many times we end up reversing a lot of that and just making it more simple. Maybe it is a nightly batch rather than trying to do things real time. Or maybe it is just kind of a handful of fields instead of turning on the full out of the box. I'm using out of the box in air quotes here, out of the box integration, because you want to start simple and then grow in that complexity. A lot of times too, what we will do is we will run these data migration or data integration projects as a completely separate parallel project. So that way we're not necessarily using the same resources and the same business owners that are using as an implementation in order to do a migration or an integration. We'll run them with a separate project manager, a separate project team, and really make sure that it's getting the time and attention that it deserves. Because so many times people wait till the very end to talk about, okay, now how are we going to migrate the data, or how are we going to integrate with this third-party system? And that's too late. You have to start from the beginning and really plan it out and make sure that you're starting simple and then growing in complexity. So number 4, design strategically, implement tactically, and test thoroughly. I don't know how many times that we've gotten this out of order in the past, but I've seen so many implementations where people just didn't design. Either that or they didn't implement it in the way it was designed, or the worst one is they just didn't test it after it was built and test it thoroughly. So it's so important to know your source, to know your destination, make sure that you really understand. Don't just take the client's word for it that the data is a certain way or a certain format. Really understand your source system. If it's an SAP system or a Salesforce system that maybe you're not as familiar with, take the time to really understand the data models. Get into it. Look at some of the data. Do some analysis to make sure you understand where your null records are, where your different pick list values are, where things can just be manually entered. Really understanding that data is going to help you to really design in a good way. And then also testing, make sure you define who that owner is and who's responsible from the business side of things for testing these integrations. It's really important that every integration, every migration that you're working with is tested thoroughly, and that you have a single person who's responsible for making sure that they sign off that an integration or a set of data has been migrated correctly. And number 5, decide on a system of record for each record type. We try so hard, and I know everyone here has experienced this as well. A lot of times clients just say, we want the data to go both directions. And while that's great, is it really the requirement? And I think a lot of times we just make the data flow 2 directions because it's what the client says, and not necessarily that that's really the requirement. Anytime possible, you should always try to define one system of record for each data that you're trying to bring over. So which system is going to be the master for your inventory items? What system is going to be the master for your customers or contacts? And making sure that you have that defined, so that way whenever the integrations run and whenever the clients are testing, that they really understand which direction that the data should be flowing. And number 6, last but not least, make sure you implement the correct pattern. So once you have defined everything, you understand why you're integrating, once you understand kind of how you're designing things, then you have to really understand what business problem you're trying to solve. And sometimes that's not just asking the question, because the client or the end user who's giving you the requirement may not necessarily fully understand why that they need what they're asking for. So getting into the weeds with them, making sure that you're reading between the lines, that you're not necessarily just taking their word for something, that you're really taking the time to understand the full business process and really getting into the detail of what the correct integration pattern is. And the other part of this is making sure you know the long-term strategy. It's not just about what they want to do right now, but what do they want to do 2 years from now? Because that could change the way that you design and build a data integration based on what the requirements are in the future. So these next 2 slides are really all about user adoption and kind of how we set measurable and attainable goals. And yes, it goes along with data integration. Data integration is all about understanding what goal you're trying to solve. So when you're trying to solve those, really, how do you understand what the end result is? A very common mistake is you get all the way to the end of the project just to have somebody say, hey, well, this takes more clicks than it did before, or I don't even have the same data that I had in my old system. And the biggest reason for that is because at the very beginning of the project, somebody didn't set measurable and attainable goals. So you have to make sure that this is kind of your scorecard for the project. That what do you want to measure? What do you want to actually get sign off from the business? And that is a really key way to making sure your project is successful, is setting measurable and attainable goals. So make sure you can measure it and make sure that you can actually achieve it. So many times we see goals that are set for a project that there's no way possible that that goal could ever be achieved. So make sure it's both measurable and attainable. As an example, one of the biggest goals that we've seen, and I'm sure you've heard of these things before, is we want to eliminate entry in 2 systems. Right now we're entering things into 2 different systems. We only want to enter that into 1 system. Well, that is certainly a good, measurable, and attainable goal, right? If users no longer have to use 2 systems, they can only use 1. That's measurable and probably attainable. So that's a good goal. Or as another example, I want to reduce the PO entry clicks to log a PO by 10. So I want it to take 10 less clicks for a person to enter a purchase order, or whatever that is. Maybe it's 5 clicks, 3 clicks, but that is very measurable. Now we know when we design things how that we should be approaching the problem because we know what the end result needs to be. And that is a simplified way to enter purchase orders. Those kind of things, setting those goals are going to be very important for making sure you know how you're successful. Another example of a measurable and attainable goal is we want to enable all users to enter a quote or a sales order. Everyone in the system should be able to enter a quote. And right now, maybe it's a separate system and you only have a handful of users that are using a sales or CRM tool to enter quotes. But we want to open that up. We want everybody in the system to be able to enter a quote. Or maybe I want one place to view everything about a customer. I'm sure everyone's heard this one before. This is the 360-degree view of a customer, right? From one form, I want to see everything that's going on with my customer. Those are all good goals. But unless you start out with that goal in mind, you're probably going to design things and you're probably going to architect things different. And so as you start going through this project, making sure that you're always looking back to what is our goal for how we're going to do this integration? What is our goal for the whole project? That will help keep you aligned internally with your project team to make sure that you're all looking at things in the right way. This will also really help scope creep as well. So that it'll keep things from getting out of control and people getting off track because you can always look back and say, what were our goals at the beginning of the project? So undoubtedly, there is always something that goes wrong in the project. So this could be with a data integration for sure, because a lot of times data integrations and data migrations, quite frankly, that's where a lot of things typically go wrong. And the main reason why is because of how complicated they are. But the things that you should watch out for, I want to give you some red flags that how you know that something is going wrong in the project. First thing, this is almost exactly like clockwork. Every single time that a project starts to go wrong, the very first thing that happens is the customer or the project team, they begin to blame the previous partner or the previous consultant that worked on them. It's all that other partner's fault. It's all that other consultant's fault. And yes, maybe sometimes there are some things that people could do better, but sometimes just stress can cause things to go wrong. And just the fact that we're getting close to go live or getting close to a system go live or cutoff can be very, very stressful and hard. So don't fall into that trap. Your vendor is probably not the problem. The previous partner is probably not the problem. There's a lot of talented Microsoft partners out there. We work with about 100 of them. And I can tell you that for the most part, they're all pretty good and they all pretty well know the systems. So yes, certain ones have other strengths over others, but don't be so quick to blame the previous partner or the consultant when something goes wrong. The next thing that typically happens is that there's some blame that goes to the person who had the job before. So, it's all Jane's fault or it's all Mike's fault because he had the job before me and he just told them to do things that wasn't in best practice, or he was telling them to design a system this way and that's not the way it needed to go. Well, really Jane or Mike or whoever had the job before you probably had reasons for why they did that. So don't be so quick to blame the previous person for a failure in the project or in the integration. because they could have had a reason that you just don't understand yet. And then almost always, kind of one of the last things that starts to happen is they blame the vendor. So whoever the current vendor is, whoever the current partner is, man, that's when things start to go wrong. You start seeing that blame start going around. You have to make sure and combat that, because generally the vendor that's selected is not the problem. There's something deeper. There's something people-wise that we have to change. Sometimes it's leadership in the company that's either some sort of buy-in problem, or if there's politics going on inside of an organization. Generally, a lot of times that is what causes the issues. So we have to make sure not to just quickly throw the current vendor under the bus, so to speak, and make sure that we are really taking a look at what is the true problem. Do we have an issue with politics in our organization? Do we have an issue with people not really understanding the business requirements or not really understanding the data? All of that is important to get into. So then the final thing that typically happens is they blame the software, right? Microsoft wasn't the right pick. We should have went with SAP, or SAP was terrible. We should have went with Salesforce. Whatever the tool is, there's always that tendency to say the software couldn't fix my problem. And man, that could be probably one of the things that's the furthest from the truth. You know, these days, a lot of the software and a lot of the technology, they all can do pretty much anything you need it to do. If you can't do it out of the box, you can customize it. If you can't customize it, you can build an add-on, you can buy an add-on, you can find a vendor. Like, generally, software and technology is not the problem. So don't stress. Budgets being tight, it's all normal. You have to make sure that when you get to the end of the project, or when things start going wrong, that you don't just blame the software. Because the truth is, the problem is probably you. And admit that you don't know how to fix it. Like, this is an integration that's too complicated for me. I need somebody to help. Or this integration, I don't know how to build it. I don't understand the business process. I don't understand the technology. Whatever it is, it's so important that as we do these things, that we are quick to raise our hand and say, I don't know how to fix this problem. And that in and of itself will help allow that frustration to not spill into the users, instead to give it a really good way of following through on things. All right, so let's talk a little bit about identifying requirements. So whenever we are identifying that requirement, this is where we're talking about data integrations and how we unpack what the real requirement is for the system. Because sometimes it's not always what we think it is. So as we start to identify those requirements, there can be a very different solution for each one of these. So let's talk about them. So the first one there is we want a single point of data entry. How many people have heard this one before, right? I only want to enter data in one place. Well, you know what? That needs an integration. We're going to be pushing information from one system to another, so we have to have an integration there. We want CRM accounts to flow through to customers or vendors in the ERP platform. We want a quote to flow through to ERP as a sales order. We want an opportunity to go in as a quote. Whatever that is, we want one place to enter data, and then it needs to flow through somewhere else. So that one definitely requires a data integration. We have to build something for that. The other requirement that we hear a lot is all about process integrations. So a process integration, I like to think of this as like a triggering event. So we've got a web lead that comes in, and we need to push that into our sales team. Or as an example, we've got a case that comes in, a service ticket that gets logged, that maybe that needs to come in for as a service order or a project that somebody needs to work on from a customer portal or some sort of an external system. Well, that requires an integration too, because we have to move data from one place to another. So anytime you start hearing, I want to trigger something, when I do this, I want this other thing to happen, almost always that is an integration. And then the third item is just keeping data in sync. A lot of times the requirement is that we just want data that exists in one system to automatically show up in the other. So we want customers to always be there. We want any of our products, like our product catalog, as an example, we want that to exist across systems. All of those things are really good requirements to think about. But you know what? That requires an integration too. We have to move data in order to keep data in sync between the two systems. So if you've got any of those first three, man, don't delete your integrations yet because you probably need them to solve those top three requirements. Anytime you hear somebody wanting a single point of entry, or they want some sort of a triggering process or a data synchronization, all of those things will typically require some type of integration. But if you hear the requirement or you've defined a requirement that is all about, I want one place to see information, that whole, I want one place to view all the details about my customer, whether that data is in CRM or ERP or whatever it is, I want to see all of that in one spot. Well, that doesn't necessarily need an integration because there's lots of ways to solve that problem. It could be a customer portal. You could actually see things inside of a dashboard, whether it's Power BI or some other tool. You can do that. You can solve that requirement a lot of different ways. So we don't necessarily need a data integration to do that. And we're going to talk about some of that more in just a second. And I want to show you a few examples. And then the last one is legacy system access. A lot of times, and this is really true with data migration projects, a lot of times people just want to move the data because they think they may need it someday. You know, we're migrating from SAP over to Business Central or Finance and Operations or whatever the ERP tool is, but we just feel like we might need that data someday. So let's go ahead and migrate it all. That is not the right reason to migrate data because there's lots of other ways to do it. You know, bringing it into some sort of a data warehouse or bringing it into Dataverse or doing some other things outside of your actual system tables, maybe create some custom placeholders for that information, export it out to Excel. There's lots of ways to solve the problem without just bringing in data because the client says they may need it one day. That is always a good red flag that you should be looking at anytime someone says, I need access to information, to really make sure that you're thinking about what the requirement really is and not just building an integration because someone needs access to their legacy system data. So once you have defined what the pattern is or what the requirement is, then and only then can you select the correct pattern for how you build the integration. And there's a lot of different ways to build integrations. So I want us to talk through some of these real quick, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples of why and how you should build the different types of integrations. So the first type of integration is something called a point-to-point integration. So when something happens in system A, I want it to trigger something in system B. An example could be there of whenever I enter an opportunity in a CRM tool, whether it's Salesforce or customer engagement, whatever the tool is, I want that to create a quote in my ERP system. Well, that can be point to point. And think about this as this is a perfect reason to use Power Automate. So Power Automate is really, really good at taking something happens in one system and moving that one record over to the other system. Not about moving lots of data. It's all about one transaction that needs to happen when a certain thing happens. So that triggering is a perfect way to use point-to-point integrations. The second type of integration is a service bus. So think about a service bus as kind of a central repository for messages that all have attributes that determine what location that data needs to go. As an example, we may have a quote that is coming from a CRM system that needs to go to multiple ERP systems based on the location. So as an example, you have a single CRM tool that sales is using. They enter a quote, but which ERP system does it go to is depending on where the customer is located. Maybe you have multiple countries involved and the delivery location of that data could be different. Well, that could be something like a service bus solution where you have one message and then where that data goes is all based on the logic. So start to think about this as more of like an Azure solution. So this could be an Azure Function app. It could also be a tool like Azure Service Bus that could facilitate that. You'll probably need some sort of a tool in order to facilitate a service bus style integration. So the third one, this is probably the most common. You've probably seen this one in a lot of different systems. So this is a concept of determining what has changed in one system and then moving that over to another. So as an example, we may do something like looking for any customers that have changed in the last hour and then moving those changes into the other system. Or show me any orders that were entered yesterday and I'm going to create invoices for them tonight. That is called polling. I'm polling the other system to see what changed so that way I can then move the data. A lot of times that's going to require some sort of a third-party tool, such as a scribe tool or Kingsway Soft or Cozy Rock or SSIS, something like that in order to facilitate it. You can do a polling integration with Power Automate, but the performance on that is not going to be as good as some of those third-party tools. So it's certainly still possible, but really start to think about how you do polling integrations by using a tool like SSIS in order to facilitate that integration. And then there's also something called a broadcast pattern. This is a less common. This is really more about polling and point to point, but it's when something goes to multiple destinations. So I'll give you as an example here. Let's say that an order is placed for a product and that product needs to go to 3 different manufacturing organizations in order for it to be assembled. Maybe one quote in CRM now needs to go to multiple ERP systems in order for the assembly process or for the manufacturing process to occur. So in that instance, we're probably going to have some kind of custom development in order to facilitate a broadcast pattern. So anytime you start to hear one source, multiple destinations, you really need to start thinking about custom dev there. And that can be some sort of an Azure solution still, or it could be some sort of a custom .NET solution that's built that runs in Azure, whatever the case is, but you're probably not going to get away from writing some custom code, even if you're using a tool to facilitate it, whenever you start hearing about broadcast or I want one thing to go to multiple locations. And then finally, the one that we're going to spend the rest of this session talking about here for a little bit, and that's read-only integrations. So a read-only integration, man, I mean, we could spend probably an hour talking about each one of these and talk about all the different scenarios and ways that you can do it in tools. But read-only integrations, I want to spend some time on it because I want to see us start using more of these. I want people to start thinking a little bit more about when to not move data, when we should stop building data integrations and just build a read-only solution. So let's talk about read-only solutions. One of the biggest common read-only solutions is reports. I'm sure you guys have used these today. I'm sure that you've built reports and custom reports and seen those reports that can be built to help facilitate things like this. But anytime we start hearing the requirement that says, I want to see information, that's when we should really start to think about reports. So what's the good thing about reports? What can we do that's good? Well, it's familiar development. I mean, almost everyone has built some kind of a query in either customer engagement, Power Platform, Business Central. You can build queries, right? You can save those queries, you can turn them into reports, and all of that is great. And it's very familiar development. So I think that is a really good thing. It's simple for people to build. And really, this is all about simplified reports. So it's best if you have a very simple requirement that you want to build something and you want to quickly pull a list of data. Well, that's a really nice way of showing data across multiple systems because you can do that with reports by bringing that data in and then showing it in reports. You can also connect to other data sources in reports, right? You can retrieve data from a warehouse or for some other things and you can connect it. Sure to get a little bit more complex whenever you do that, and the possibility for code definitely goes up whenever you start working on data warehouses and things like that, but you can certainly do it with reports. Also, reports are pretty low maintenance. Once you've got them built, they kind of run. As long as they can get to the data source, they work really well. And they also can facilitate real-time processing. So if you want to pull data in real time from one system to another, a report can certainly be a good way to do that. And then you can also schedule the refresh of that, depending on the tool you're using for reporting. You can definitely schedule the refresh of those reports in order to make that data cached and load more quickly. But the nice thing about reports is you can then take those reports and you can show them across multiple systems. So if you want to bring them into a portal, or if you want to actually show those reports inside of customer engagement, or make them accessible from a dashboard, all of that can be done with reports. So that is a good thing. But what's bad about reports? Well, they're limited in what they can query, right? You do have some limitations on how you can build queries in order to build some very complex things. If you start getting into a lot of data modeling, you're better off using a tool like Power BI or another data warehouse in order to do some of that data modeling to then show it. So you're limited in what you can query. Also, context is a little bit difficult. So as an example, if you're looking at a customer and you want to see just the things that are relevant for that customer, that kind of gets complicated. And you generally have to spend some code doing that, depending on what system you're connecting to and where you're showing that data. Also, multiple sources are different. If you want to combine 3 or 4 sources together and show that, that can be a little bit difficult. You may need a data warehouse in order to facilitate that. And that starts to add a lot of cost and a lot of complexity to projects. Also, reports don't always look that great. They're kind of very tabular. They're very, just the way that they look are very Excel in nature. And so sometimes business users don't like the look of the UI for reports. And then also, they're very read-only, right? You can't necessarily change data in a report and have that feed back into its other system. So anytime you hear someone wanting to push data around between systems, that's probably not a good candidate for a report. So another option for building read-only integrations is custom development. Like we can build a Azure web app or something similar that could then embed that data across systems. So you can build an add-on, you could do some of those things in order to show information from multiple systems together. And one great way to do this is with Canvas apps. And I'll show you an example of a Canvas app that we built that does some of this in just a few minutes. So the good thing about custom development is it gives you the ability to pretty much do anything you want. You can build custom integrations, you can build custom UIs, anything you can dream, you can do because it's all custom. It also gives you the ability to have a pretty seamless interface between applications. You can style the apps to look similar. You can do a lot of that will really help. You can also provide read and write capabilities. It's not just all about seeing the data. Whenever you start talking about custom development, you can actually write data across systems, which is great. And then you can also do real-time processing. So the beauty of custom dev is you can reach out, you can grab the data, you can pull it in real time to be able to show it to your screen or your form or whatever it is that you're looking at. But custom development comes with a downside too. You have to write the code, right? You have to have developers on staff, or you have to hire developers, or you have to get involved in custom code. And a lot of times that starts to require maintenance as systems get updated, and we know how frequently Microsoft specifically updates a lot of things. We want those updates, but it requires maintenance if you have custom code. So making sure we keep that in mind when we make the decision to build a read-only development integration, that's really important. Also, web APIs. Not every single system that we need to connect to may have a web API. And if you're going to use any of the online platforms, you really have to have web APIs set up in order to accurately retrieve that source and destination information. And you can get around that a little bit with some things like Power BI and being able to embed some data sources in there from other systems without having to have web APIs with a SQL connection or something similar. A lot of that's possible, but you really need to think about how am I getting to the data and what is the security model that needs to be in place so that we can do it. And then anytime you're dealing with big data, lots of data sets, there's some complexity that comes around that with custom dev. And you really have to worry about user experience and making sure that you're building it in a way that will give the users the most performance for the screen that they're on. So I'm going to show you two examples, and I want you just to think here about ways that you can think about using this. So I've got a couple of these, and I will send these screenshots out to everyone so you can really think about it. But this, as an example, is customer engagement, and this is trying to solve the requirement of a single view of a customer. So I've got an account, and I've got a Power BI dashboard that's embedded inside of customer engagement here. And this Power BI dashboard is showing me all of the items that this customer has purchased and deliveries. So I can see what items were purchased and also what has been delivered or not delivered based on this data. And this is pulling from Business Central. So this is actually connecting to the Business Central APIs inside of Power BI. It's pulling that data into Power BI, but Power BI is then filtering down to the customer based on the screen that I'm on. So I'm on the ADatum account inside of customer engagement in the sales app, and this is showing me Business Central data right inside of customer engagement. And the beauty behind this is I didn't have to move all this information. I didn't have to move all these orders and products into customer engagement or even pull the data from Dataverse into the form. This is just simply aggregating the data in Power BI and then showing it on a dashboard. So really think about how you can use this to show and solve those requirements for things like showing customer aging, showing order history, invoice history, all of those kind of requirements. You don't necessarily have to move any data in order to make that happen. The beauty behind this too is that this can be multiple systems. So maybe the deliveries are coming from SAP, but the orders are coming from Business Central or AX or any other tool. You can combine data sets and show it in a single dashboard, which makes Power BI a really powerful solution for doing some of that read-only data integration. So the other example I'm going to give here is a Microsoft Canvas app. So if anybody's played around with some of the Canvas apps, you'll know how powerful some of these are and some of the things that you can do. It's really pretty amazing some of the stuff you can build inside of a Canvas app. So this is an example here of, again, on a customer engagement account record, I can go to my accounting tab, and all this data that I'm looking at doesn't actually live in Dataverse. So we've built this dashboard where orders are actually coming from an SAP system, invoices are coming from that same SAP system, opportunities and cases are coming from Salesforce, and then customer ranking is a calculation that we're doing in order to rank customers based on past history. So all of that data is kind of being combined across 3 different systems, including calculations, and showing that inside of a Canvas app. So this is a really nice way of creating a user interface where the data wasn't necessarily needed to be integrated, but we solved the requirement of having a single view of what's going on with the customer. Now, the beauty of a Canvas app is we can start to do things like drill in. So as an example, I can click on the customer, and that would then show me all of their invoices, their sales orders, and returns across the system. And this is Business Central data being pulled in right here into a tab that shows me that information. We can then drill further. We can see the line items that are on that invoice. We can see the price, the quantity, all that information is coming right from Business Central, and we're just simply showing it inside of customer engagement. The other thing you can do is, what's really nice, is it's not just read only. So you remember how we talked about a few minutes ago that a Canvas app could push data back the other direction as well, similar to what you could do with things like virtual entities. Well, this is a Canvas app that allows me to enter the quantity to return and then submit that. So I can actually choose to return, and that will automatically create a return order in Business Central to be able to issue that return and or process around the returns that we have set up in Business Central. And it'll create the credit memo, all of that good stuff happens automatically. So the idea here is that a person who is in customer service, they may never need to really log into Business Central. Maybe they're using just customer engagement and cases and tickets, but yet they want to issue returns and see the details of a customer. All of that can happen very easily. So I've got a couple slides. I'm going to go really quick here because I know we're hitting the end of our time. But Dynamic Consultants Group, we do have a couple of tools that are available if you're interested in doing this. We have an enterprise level auditing tool as well as a data archive tool, the ability to purge transactions from within your system and archive those out. We have a lot of this automated into a SQL data warehouse where you can do things like cloud sync if you still have on-premise data that you want to push up to CDS or Dataverse to be able to fast walk some of your cloud migrations. We have those tools available. We also have a nice reconciliation tool that's available for data. So if you want to run a reconciliation tool, you can actually see the differences between data across multiple companies and across multiple environments. It just helps to clean up that data a little bit better. Also, a tool that we use a lot that I wanted to mention is a tool called DQ On Demand. This is an amazing tool for doing things like data validation, as well as facilitating some of those data integrations. If you haven't checked it out, I would highly recommend you take a look at DQ On Demand because they allow you to do a lot of that data cleanup and a lot of data analysis, deduplication, and a lot of really great things from their DQ On Demand service. So definitely check them out. So, why is getting the answer so hard? Why is getting the right answer for how we do this so difficult? And the easy way to think about it is because it's complicated. Somebody looks at one solution and they see 4, somebody else looks at the same solution and they see 3. So you really do have to get into the requirement. You have to make sure that you're doing it the right way. You have to think about the requirement, plan it out, do it thoroughly, and make sure that you're really picking the right solution to solve the client. Don't just build an integration. And I hope, if anything, today we've just challenged you to think about how you look at integrations, how you build integrations, and not necessarily just moving data because the client says so. Instead, really thinking through the requirement and planning it out very thoroughly.